and welcome to day 24 of INKtoberfest with Maker Forte. My name's Sharon Smith and today I'm going to be showing you different techniques you can use with stencils and inks. I've made the cards up front so that I can spend time showing you how to do the actual stenciling technique. So this one here uses the oak leaf stencil in one colour. I've not used the veins, just the outline of it. And then on top of that I've overlaid Blustery day stencil so that you can get the fancy patterns inside with the oak leaves and the other shapes. Matted it onto some coloured card, cut a sentiment out and tied it on with a bit of twine. The leaf is actually raised to make it look more authentic. The next one, I'm using a plain stencil to show you how you can make a plaid effect. So for this one I've used the candy cane stencil, which is actually supposed to be used on a diagonal, but we'll work it round so that you can do it horizontal and vertical, which gives you this lovely plaid detail. On top of that I've just added a simple sayings with some blue foil and some little crystal gems. Next card is Polar Bear. This is from the Polar Bear stencil. I've just used the snowflake part of it, texture paste over the top, and then some other bits that I explain in the videos. So yeah, he's just a snowflake polar bear with a nice peace sentiment. Again, matted on some coloured cardstock, simple card. So we're going to start. I do all my stenciling on my Make Art board. I find this the easiest way. For cleaning up afterwards, you can put ink on this and it will just wipe off with a bit of water and a cloth. So I'm starting with a plain white cardstock. You can use any white cardstock that takes ink, and this is the oak leaf stencil. So I'm just going to turn this over and I'm going to place my paper on the back of it so that I can stick it down and I won't have any tape showing through my stenciling. I use just plain masking tape, making sure that I'm covering all of the actual leaf and just taping that down. Don't have to use a lot of tape if you're just doing an outline like this, just a couple of pieces to hold it in place. I didn't quite get it to cover the whole of the leaf, so I'm just going to move it over slightly. I go into making sure that I've got it straight, but really don't need to do that for this card that I'm making, just as long as you can get the outline of this leaf onto your paper. And there you go, you can see it's all covered now. I'm using flat white ink and a large blending brush. You don't have to be an expert in ink blending to do this technique. All you need to do is make sure that that outline is covered in ink. You're going over it with another stencil and that will take away any of the variation that you get from not getting an even ink covering. What I do make sure I'm doing is get a decent outline around the edges, just so that I have somewhere to line up for when I'm cutting it out. And there you go. Like you see, it's not perfect, but it's covered. So the next stage is to put the Blustery Day images on it. I'm leaving the oak leaf stencil in place and I'm looking for pattern on here that I can cover the leaf with. I want to get a decent amount on there. So I'm just lining it up. I'm trying to get the main leaf in the centre. And again, I'm going to tape that down with some masking tape. The big leaf is centred on there. Now I want to tape this down quite firmly because I don't want it to move and end up with odd shaped images. I want them all to be nice and uniform. You can use pixie spray, but I don't have any of that to hand today. So to start with, I'm doing the maple leaves that are on the stencil, and I'm going to use Grand Canyon ink. Tapping my brush off because I don't want them too dark, and I'm covering every little maple leaf, even if it's only got a tiny little bit within that leaf shape. I'm making sure that I colour it so that I get an overall image onto my oak leaf. Adding a bit more ink in there. I do want these to be a bit more uniform than my outline is, and I want them to be a nice rusty colour so that they're actually fall leaves rather than just blustery day leaves. I am going across anywhere that's got just the tiniest bit of leaf onto the main leaf pattern, just to make sure that we don't get any gaps when I fill them in with the others. So that's the leaves done. Don't have to do all of the stencil, just where your oak leaf is underneath. Next, moving on to British Racing Green, and I'm going to do the acorns with this. Yes, fall acorns aren't really green, but I wanted some comparison between them and the rest of the images on there. So making sure I catch them all. Smaller blending brushes are better for this because you're not at risk of over blending into another area, and you're able to lay down quite a bit of ink. As you can see there, there's just the tiniest bit that's onto the oak leaf, but I'm still covering it. There's dots around the maple leaves and in between the acorns, so I'm using English mustard for this. This is a nice yellow, like a fall yellow rather than a bright yellow. The actual pad looks as though it's bright orange, but you'll see when I lift the stencil off here, it's not that bright. You can always mix your colours, so you could add a bit of Grand Canyon into a yellow if you've not got a colour that you think is suitable for your design. Some of these dots are tiny, so you do need the smaller brushes to make sure that you're getting into them. You can see the ones above the main maple leaf surrounding the big one are really tiny dots. These little brushes manage to get into all of those nooks and crannies. And again, like I did with the maple leaves, making sure that I've got all the dots coloured there, and I'm going around the outline of my oak leaf to make sure that everything is covered underneath that stencil. As you can see, we've finished. So I'm now going to take off the Blustery Day stencil, and this will reveal your pattern underneath. Being careful not to smudge my images so that I'm not moving the stencil about where it is. And there you go, you can see. I'm just going to turn it over and take that piece of card off the oak leaf stencil to reveal my lovely pattern underneath. And again, I just cut this out, added the sentiment, matted it onto a card, and there you go, quite an effective fall looking card. So next we're moving on to the plaid, and for this one I'm going to use candy cane stripe stencil. So this is where the Make It Art board comes into its own really. I'm wanting these stripes to go horizontal across my paper, so I can actually line them up on the grid on that Make It Art board so that I can get a perfect pattern. So they're going horizontal, and my cardstock wants to go on the vertical lines. Again, it's just white blending card. Placing it, I'm just checking whether I've got two sides on the card there, I think. So rearranging my stencil so it's perfectly straight, and placing my card using the vertical lines so that I know that I've got that straight before I then grab my masking tape and just tape that in place on both sides, turning it all over. And now you can see that them stripes, they're not candy stripes anymore, they're vertical stripes. I went to the extreme of using masking paper over the corners of the paper that aren't covered by the stencil, so that I didn't get solid ink on them when I was blending. I changed my plan with this card, so didn't really need to do this. But you can see when I remove them how much of a white gap you've actually got on your paper. So I'm just putting some extra tape on there just to hold the stencil to the board, and using Tiptree jam ink and a large blending brush. This stencil would be great to use pixie dust on. Like I said, I didn't have any to hand, so I am going in horizontal stripes across there so as not to move the stripes of the stencil. Making sure I'm laying down a good amount of ink and trying to get it as even as possible. As you can see, lots of ink on there, and when I lift this stencil up, which takes a bit of doing because for some reason I decided it would be fun to stick the two pieces of tape together, but managed to gradually ease it away like so. Get nice stripes across. The fact that this stencil has different widths of stripes makes it a good one to do for plaid. Now I'm going to use the vertical stripes to line up that stencil, making sure that I am covering up to the corners that I had in before. I have to move the tape because part of the vertical lines now would need to be on the card, so I just move them out slightly, move my tape down just so that it's holding it in place. Yeah, inky fingers. I could have used these, but I keep forgetting that they're there. We're now going to be using Vegas strip ink and doing blue stripes across. I turn it round so that I can brush horizontally again, as I find that easier than vertically. Now I don't know whether you can spot, but I have a big mistake here. What I would suggest you do is you clean off your stencil in between layers. I didn't, and didn't realise until I'd started laying down the blue ink that it was taking the ink, the pink ink, off the stencil as well. So the Tiptree jam and the Vegas strip mixed together. My Vegas strip's a little bit on the dry side. I need to get some re-inking on there. As you know, Forte does re-inkers for all their ink pads. And this is it's not as strong a ink as the Tiptree jam is anyway, so it won't look as though it's laid down as much ink. But believe me, there's still plenty on there. And look, all the pink's disappearing off my stencil. I wonder why. So we come now, put the lid back on there. I peel that off, and instead of having pink and blue, I've got a nice shade of purple and pink. Luckily they look well together anyway. There you can see where I masked them corners off. Had I not done that, I would have had solid colour on the corners. But you can trim that down and use in the centre of the card. I actually used the oval die and cut an oval out of it to add it onto my card. We're now moving on to the polar bear. For this I'm going to be using texture paste and some sugar sprinkles in Shooting Stars, which is like an iridescent white, blue raspberry ink and ice mist. So here's the stencil. I'm just going to be using this snowflake patterned one, and I've got some watercolour cardstock for this. So I'm going to tape my stencil onto my cardstock. You do need to be careful with this one, as you'll see in a second. So I tape it down either side because I don't want him to move again. Pixie spray would be great. I am covering up the bear at the bottom, the top of the bear at the bottom, and the little hole there on the side, because I don't want these getting covered in texture paste. And once I'm done there, I can move on to my stenciling. I'm not bothered about putting it down, fasten it down onto my board. It can move about on there, no problem. It's not as if I'm laying ink down. So this is just a matte white texture paste. I'm going to smear it all over the bear. If you've never used this before, it's just like spreading butter on your toast or maybe icing a cake. You need a smooth covering. You can actually leave it a bit roughed up if you want, but I want a smooth, even coating for the next stage that I'm doing. So there's some really pretty snowflakes on this stencil. You get the outline, which is down below, you get the snowflaked bear here, and you also get the bear shape that's been cut out of the outline in with the stencil. So lots of different ways you can use it. Spreading it as evenly as possible, making sure that I've got every little part coloured. Texture paste, you can just add it back to your jar to use for next time. I try not to leave it on the edge because that can dry, but as long as your lid's on there, it lasts for a fair while. So now I want to gently remove this stencil because I don't want to dislodge any of the texture paste that's actually on the card. So I'm peeling it from the edges, lifting it up gently, and there you can see my little polar bear. You can just make out the outline of it and you can see all them pretty snowflakes. I did get a little bit of texture paste on my cardstock where I don't want it, so I removed that. Now for the sugar sparkles. There you go, I'm just removing that piece there. So I've placed it on a piece of copy paper that's been folded, and I'm covering him with all the Shooting Star sugar sparkles, making sure that every little bit of texture paste gets some of this on. You need to do this while your paste is still wet, else you find that your glitter doesn't actually stick to him. I'm just going to shake it about a bit and then tip the excess onto the paper, and you can just make out there that we've got a nice sparkly bear. Decant what's on your copy paper back into your jar because that can be used. It goes a long way to these glitters, and this is a really nice iridescent one. It's got like a green to it. Now what you need to do is leave that bear to dry. You want your texture paste nice and dry so that your glitter is stuck on there. And there you go, he's all nice and dry now, so we're ready for the next stage, and we're going to add some colour to him now. So I'm using Icy Mist to start with, and I'm going to use it like a watercolour. Blue Raspberry is going to come on as well, but we're starting with the Icy Mist. press my pad onto my board, making sure I've got a fair bit of ink down there. Now you need lots of water with this, but spraying plenty on there, and I'm using a wide brush for the first part of this. Picking up the ink and just dropping it on to the bear. I did realise at this stage that I've forgotten to re-wet my bear. Although you wanted the texture paste dry so that the glitter stuck to it, you need it wet to add your colour to it. So I sprayed him nice and wet, and I'm just going all over him now with the Icy Mist ink to give him a nice pale blue colour. This is a great delicate ink which is good for this type of technique. Again, he is going to be covered, and you won't actually be able to see much of this ink once he dries until you start adding the blue raspberry. There you go, he's nice and dry from the Icy Mist, and we're now adding blue raspberry. This is one of my favourite colours. I love the colour of this ink. It's almost like a vibrant turquoise. We need a finer brush for this. Again, lots of water in that ink, but not spraying your bear this time. What I'm doing this time is I am painting onto the texture paste, but the places that are in between the snowflakes, to make the snowflakes stand out more. You'll have to excuse, my dogs are barking in the background. So covering all the areas which are in between the snowflakes, this will make the snowflakes pop a little bit more and stand out against the darker colour. Keep going over, making sure that you get down on his feet, although there's big snowflakes down there, so there's not a great deal to colour with the blue raspberry. The sections are almost like little hooks that are between the snowflakes, so they're easy to kind of pick out where you need your colour. You can do this technique, instead of using sugar sparkles, you can use clear embossing powder. Then when you put your ink onto there, it resists the snowflakes and it would go into all the crevices between the texture paste. I've done both ways and I like them both. There you can see the sparkles on that. Isn't he adorable? So we're just going to make him into a card. What we do is just trim him down. I stamped the piece sentiment on there and matted him on cardstock. Thank you so much for taking time to watch my video. Here are my 3 completed cards. I hope you learned something today. My favourite technique is the glitter one. Don't forget to come back tomorrow for day 25.